What's up, guys, and welcome back to Tranceportal in the Studio with me, EverLight. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. This week saw the release of my book, Hitting the High Notes, which is a book I wrote all about achieving long-term success and happiness with your music production journey. Now, that talks all about the career aspect of things. It talks about building a brand. So I thought I'd do a video that talks a little bit about the technical side of things. So today's video is all about the differences between an amateur sounding production and a professional sounding production, and the things that you can do to get from one to the other. So let's get over into Ableton and we'll talk about all of the points I have. So here we are inside of Ableton, although today Ableton isn't going to be super relevant because today we're going to be talking more about larger concepts about music production as a whole. The first thing we're going to talk about is the current landscape of being a new music producer within trance. It's actually really awesome if you're just starting out in music production just now, because the availability of tutorials and technical tools, advice, etc., including our own series, Tranceportal in the Studio with, things like templates, sample banks, presets, all that sort of stuff is an awesome resource for new producers. And it means that starting from nothing to learning a DAW like Ableton and getting sounds and all that sort of stuff, all the way up to completing a decent sounding song is actually pretty easy now compared to what it was, say, 10 years ago. When I first started making music, it was really difficult. We're talking about 14, 15 years ago. I pretty much had to learn everything on my own, had to make everything on my own. The knock-on effect that that's had is that the difficult part about making music is no longer learning how to do it. It's actually learning how to make good music. It's learning how to create something that is worthwhile listening to. It's about learning how to have brilliant ideas and how to add detail and uniqueness to your music. Through the engineering services I provide, things like stem mixdowns, mastering, that sort of stuff, I have come into contact with hundreds and hundreds of clients that have come from this modern background of learning how to make music. And what's interesting is that most, pretty much I'd say 90%, run into the same series of problems. What's cool about that is that it's allowed me to kind of focus on those issues and be able to create this video where we're going to be talking about the main things that an amateur producer can do to level up their productions and turn into a professional producer. So the first section that we're going to talk about is ideas and their execution and ideas generation. And the first point within this section is professionals never settle on the first idea, and they have strict quality control with what projects they work on to completion. Conversely, as a beginner, when you first start production, anything at all, making anything at all, is long and hard and difficult. So that has the effect of you becoming attached or committed to the first idea that you're working on because you've spent so much time on it, even if that idea isn't necessarily that great to begin with. The difference between that and a professional producer is a professional or someone who's super experienced will have loads of fundamentals on how to make how to make sounds very quickly. So it would take them half an hour to come up with a new idea, a new melody, a new bass line or something like that. Whereas for a beginner producer, it will take a lot longer. For a beginner producer, it isn't worth throwing away all of that time for a new idea that might be better than the one that they're currently working on. Whereas a professional producer has got no problem doing that because it takes them a fraction of the time. An interesting thing to note is that in my own experience, every 1 in 10 attempts is a track that actually makes it to completion. That means that 9 songs, 9 track ideas are left on the cutting room floor, which is a lot if you think about it. If you were to go to a job interview and you said to them, hey, I'm going to throw away every 9 in 10 projects that you give me and only complete one of them, they would laugh you out of the building. But it is something that a professional or experienced music producer would do because it means assurance on the quality control. The next point under ideas and ideas generation is great ideas are born from experimentation. So at the start, as I've mentioned, everything takes way longer, which discourages new producers from wasting time experimenting with different ideas when they could be finishing up the one that they have. Now, I mentioned that before, but specifically,
technical experimentation suffers because you don't know how to use the different processes, you don't know how to use different sound design tools, you don't have the knowledge of them yet, which not only means that are you less willing to experiment with them because you want to complete a track, but it also means that you have less knowledge on how those processes, this type of sound design, this effect, etc., all of these different building blocks of the music production process, you don't know how they can be combined to create something different and unique. Experimentation is vital to ideas generation, and at the beginning, new producers are often very results focused because everything takes so long. I always say to new producers, dedicate time to experimenting, not learning, experimenting. Go to your sound design tools, your synthesizers, your effects, mess around with them, figure out for yourself what they do. The good ideas that you will get will be off the back of your own accidents. Put simply, the more sound design processes that you know how to use through knowledge, but also through experimentation, the more you can combine them in more increasingly complex and unique ways, which means that you will, through that process, develop unique sounds, unique melodies, and unique processes that are specific to you and you only. And finally, under the ideas and ideas generation section, experienced producers are not afraid to take risks with their ideas. So people that are experienced with production, they have lots of experience behind them, they're less risk averse because they're more confident in their own abilities. Amateur producers have a tendency to stick to what's safe and what works. They stick to the things that they know in tutorials, they stick to what they've been told, because they're new, they're trying to build a brand, they're trying to get people to like their music, so they kind of stick to what they know is tried and tested. But in my experience, the best thing that you can possibly do for both your own music production ability and for building a brand is trying to be as unique as possible right from the get-go. Being unique is one of the best things you can do to build a brand, even if it means alienating people, because at least you will turn heads, and the people that do like you as a result of that will like you with much more energy and enthusiasm than they would have otherwise if you were making music that sounded like everybody else. And the only way that you can do that is by taking risks when you're sat here in front of your workstation. Take risks with experimenting with new processes, do something different to how a tutorial has told you, try out new melody styles, new sound styles, etc. You've got to do it all off of your own back and really take the risk, even if it means that all of that hard work that you've put in and completing the track could be a flop. You have to be willing to take that risk. So the next segment we're going to talk about is about arrangement and background details. Something interesting that happens the more you work on music, or the more that you listen to music in a professional environment, professional capacity, is you actually learn how to hear better. At the beginning, when you're first learning how to make music and you're first listening to tracks and analyzing them, you will likely probably be able to hear something like between 8, 10, or even up to 20 different elements in a song. So if you sat down and you listened to a song and tried to write out different parts that you hear, that would be the amount that you would be able to get to at the very beginning. But as you train your ears, as you work on more music, as you listen to more music in a professional environment, your ears will train to hear more, and eventually you will be able to hear much further back into the mix. Now, this has an impact on your mix downs, more on that in a minute, but it also has an impact on your arrangements. Now, Disco Death Machine here is a good example of that, because this song is 52 channels long. A lot of it is very small background details which kind of all add together to create a sense of space, a sense of depth. Now, about 5 years ago, I had a track that released, and that was only 25 channels deep, should we say. But obviously, the difference in terms of technical quality, in terms of depth, is way different between that song that I released 5 years ago and Disco Death Machine. Also, in terms of arrangements, the quicker that you get making and perfecting the basics, so those first 8 to 10 elements like your kick, your bass, your percussion, etc., the more energy and enthusiasm you will have to add even further details on top of those, including unusual elements of sound design, little one-off fills or fillers and stuff like that, or even entirely new sections of the track, as is the case with Disco Death Machine. So the whole idea behind Disco Death Machine is that it has 2 bassline styles, and that could only really be achieved if you know how to make both types of bass lines, and you know how to do both of them pretty quickly, and you can have fun with it. The better you get at the fundamentals of music production, the more you can get complex with it. You have more time, more energy, more enthusiasm to create entirely new, wacky ideas. A good example of someone that does this really effectively is Will Atkinson. For example, his track on 7, Golden Hour, it has so many different types of elements in it. And the reason that Will was able to do that with Simon Patterson is because both of them are incredible producers and have loads of experience, and making each one of those individual sounds probably didn't take very long at all, whereas a beginner producer is going to be spending a lot of time even making just a basic bass line, and that is where they spend most of their effort. Over here on the topic of Disco Death Machine, what's interesting to note is 90% of this song, what most people would consider to be a finished track, took 3 days to make, whereas the 10% of polish to get it from a finished track to getting it to an amazing track which could be released on 7 took 2 weeks. If you're a beginner producer, that first 3 days, the first 90%, would have probably taken you months and months and months. So that's the importance of developing those fundamentals and getting quick and good at making the basics. So the next major point we are going to discuss is your mix downs. Now, I've done a video before here on Tranceportal in the Studio where I talked about mix downs, and you should go and look at that video because it's super awesome technical advice. As mentioned at the start, when you're just beginning your musical journey, you're going to be pretty deaf to the details or the nuances of what it takes to go in a mix down. You will notice that in the mix down tutorial that I made for Tranceportal, the types of things that I do are incredibly basic. There isn't lots of technical wizardry happening. It's all very nuanced, and the reason is because 90% of what makes a good mix down is having a good ear, and you do that through listening to amazing music in a professional environment so you can analyze it, and that trains your ear so that you know what's going to sound amazing when you're making your own music. But that will change when you're like 250 songs in. You will hear loads more detail in the arrangements, in the mix downs. Your ears will train so that you can hear what elements clash more effectively. Obviously at this stage, a limiting factor is going to be your equipment, so as mentioned, you're probably going to want to be looking to upgrade, but all of this will happen naturally. You will notice that you are plateauing and that your mix downs are kind of sounding inconsistent and all the same, and they have been for a while. And if you get to that stage, then the answer probably is looking at your listening environment. Is there something you can do to upgrade that? Can you get acoustic foam or acoustic installation? Can you get a set of nice monitors? One of the things that happened to me is for years and years I created mix downs which I thought sounded good, but after having a discussion with a few different people, they said to me the limiting factor of my productions was the last 10% of polish. And when I heard that, I heard it from a good friend of mine, Activa, I went out and I bought a set of Genelec monitors for my music studio. In the year that followed, my productions went from here to the stage that you are hearing them now. For a long time they stayed at a very, very middling level of technical polish and quality, and it wasn't until it was pointed out to me that I decided that the equipment in my studio was the limiting factor, and I went away and I upgraded that, and the glass ceiling was removed, and I managed to excel to the level of technical polish that I have today. Okay, so we've talked an awful lot about the differences between what beginner producers do and what professional producers do, and to be honest, you're probably kind of feeling a bit deflated, maybe thinking, oh my god, that's so much work. So let's talk a little bit about how you can get from being where you are now as a beginner producer to being a excellent professional sounding producer. You'll notice, if you have a keen ear, if you've been paying attention, that pretty much every single point that I have mentioned can be solved with one pretty simple on the topic of it measure, and that is simply getting faster at making music. Being quicker at making music means that you're more happy to throw away good work in favor of great work because it didn't take you as long to make. It means you have more time to spend on the upper levels of detail when it comes to music production, such as all the stuff that's really going to set you out, like the one-off little hits and details, the background, the polish of your mix, etc., etc. So the key thing that you're going to want to focus on to get yourself from being a beginner to being a professional is to get faster at making music. Okay, so just get faster at music production, just get good at adding more detail, just get better at mixed downs. It's not particularly helpful advice, right? Kind of frustrating to hear, but that isn't necessarily what you need to do right now. That is just what the professionals are doing. That's what sets them apart. The way for you to start making music faster so that you can start focusing on what the professionals focus on is through having experience. And the only way that you can gain experience is through repetition. You need to gain experience with the overall track creation process so that you become faster at the fundamentals each time you make a song. You should not be hyper focused on one song. You should not be consuming as many tutorials as you possibly can and not making music. You should be spending all of your time working on new songs over and over and over again. Do not let perfection get in the way of progress. It is far better to work through and call songs finished quickly, even if they aren't great, because completing the entire track creation process over and over is much better for your experience than being hyper focused on one track. And that is what is going to get you quicker at the fundamentals, and then later you will be able to focus on what makes your track sound professional. So the final point in this video, and the elephant in the room, is that all of what I've said takes time and it takes patience. It does sound like a huge undertaking, and to be honest, it is. You kind of really have to enjoy the process of making songs in order for you to get there. But the reason I'm telling you is because I'm trying to say to you that it's okay to be where you are right now. Getting experience with the fundamentals takes a very long time. And that is in sharp contrast to when you first learn how to make music. When you first open your door of choice and you've not known anything before, you're observing all these tutorials, you're learning about how everything works. The progress that you make from nothing to completing a track is really quick. You can burn through that in the space of a couple of weeks to a month. But then once you get to the point of decent, getting from decent to professional takes years. And that is the point where a lot of new music producers get stuck. It's where they get frustrated because they see a complete drop off in the progress that they're making compared to what they were making before. And I'm here to tell you that that is perfectly fine. That is expected, because what is actually happening here while you are working on these tracks over and over again is your fundamentals are being rooted. Your roots are growing. You can't see the progress, but each time you make a song, you're getting slightly quicker, which frees up more time and resources for you to work on upper level advanced production. And guys, that is all I have time to speak to you today. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different focused video. If you were interested in more mindset level talk about music production and its career, don't forget to check out my website and check out my book, Hitting the High Notes. You can find out more information at everlightmusic.com. Guys, this has been Tranceportal in the studio with, I of course have been EverLight. Don't forget to like and subscribe to all of our channels, and I'll see you all again next time.